Recently I started reading the first Dune book, and after rewatching the movie a couple of times, I thought about making another video concerning the film, especially now since the sequel's production is slowly starting. And you might be thinking, didn't you already make a Dune video? Well, yes, but at the time the footage I could use was limited. With the Blu Ray now out, I can do an in-depth analysis of the movie. You already know how this goes. I'll talk about the plot, its characters, and technical aspects. A quick heads up, this video will contain spoilers, so without further ado, hop on your ornithopter and let's travel to Arrakis. The movie begins with a monologue from the character Chani. It establishes the world and the main conflict perfectly, which is controlling the spice, a substance that's very valuable to the inhabitants of the planet Arrakis, the Fremen, granting them long life and health benefits. Consuming too much changes their eye color to a strong blue. The Outsiders use the spice to power up their spaceships, enabling them to travel across the universe efficiently. The owners of Arrakis at this point are House Harkonnen, but due to the Imperial's orders, they proceed to leave, passing the command to another family. We then meet the main protagonists, Paul Atreides, the son of Duke Leto Atreides and Lady Jessica. Before the ceremony that will make House Atreides the owner of Arrakis, the concept of the voice is introduced. The voice is a skill that Lady Jessica and her order, the Bene Gesserit, have that's used to mind control humans, something she's teaching her son to do. The sound design of the voice is excellent, and when used, the owner's natural voice comes off distorted and with an echo. I really liked how it was portrayed in the film. You could feel its power. During the ceremony, there's no feeling of excitement. It's rather mysterious and suspicious, aided by an ominous score. This is especially clear when you see Jessica's reaction after the Duke puts his seal in the contract. Deep inside of her, she knows that this ownership will not end well. The film does a phenomenal job at establishing the key players in the overall story, starting with the introduction of the Fremen, then the Atreides, and now the Harkonnen, who live in the planet Gidi Prime. Right away you can see the contrast between both houses just by looking at the aesthetics of each planet. The Atreides' homeworld Caladan is beautiful and peaceful, with trees, water, and with an architecture that's very intricate. On the opposite side, Gidi Prime is ugly and has a more industrial look, with a black/grey color palette and metal everywhere. This is where Baron Vladimir Harkonnen lives. His introduction scene is excellent, with his powerful and massive figure sitting naked surrounded by fog. From the looks of it, seems like a sauna. We see that his nephew Rabban is angry at the switch of ownership of Arrakis. The Baron teases that the universe's emperor is involved in this political strategy. I like that even with his imposing presence, the Baron fears the emperor, claiming him to be a dangerous and jealous man. Might I add that I really enjoyed the design of Piter de Vries, the Baron's mentat. Think of him like a living computer. He has a super creepy and sinister look. In the book, there's this mutual hate between them. I wish it could have been explored in the film, but unfortunately Piter is not in the movie that much. Interestingly enough, the Baron's younger nephew Fade Rotha is absent during the scene and in the movie as a whole. I can understand the thought process behind this decision since the character doesn't add too much to the narrative in the first half of the book. But even then, I'm excited to see his appearance in the next film and how he interacts with Paul Atreides, considering their characters are polar opposites of each other. This next sequence is one of my favorites, the Gom Jabbar test. The scene begins when the Bene Gesserit land on Caladan. The change of attitude in Lady Jessica is interesting. When she's alone, she's a confident and calm woman, but when she's with the Bene Gesserit, especially around her teacher, the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayim, Jessica is anxious and scared. There will be a subtle explanation to her reactions later on in the movie. Paul then meets the Reverend Mother as she begins the test. He needs to put his right hand inside a box that will make him feel an enormous pain. Not many people survive the Gom Jabbar, so that's one of the reasons as to why his mother was very worried. If you think about it, the test is extremely difficult because Paul feels as if his hand is burning, and even so he's able to go past his natural instinct of removing his hand from the source of the pain, showing how powerful he is. In the scene there's a great back and forth between Paul and Jessica, where she's saying to herself the famous quote from the book, "I must not fear, fear is the mind killer," one of the many phrases that are used by the Bene Gesserit to calm themselves. It's also something she taught her son, so it's cool that while Paul is handling the pain, you also hear the quote in the background. He manages to pass the test, and even the Reverend Mother was impressed. She then gets angry at Jessica for breaking the rules, because while living with the Atreides, Jessica was ordered only to produce daughters. The Reverend Mother adds,
"His sight is barely awakened, and now he goes into the fire."
Meaning that even though Paul passed the Gom Jabbar, he's still not ready to embrace his future. After she leaves Caladan, we learn of their plan to teach their ways to the Chosen One, the Kwisatz Haderach, a male version of the Bene Gesserit, which in this case is Paul Atreides, someone that can see into the future and can put an end to all the problems in the Imperium. I found the Bene Gesserit to be very interesting. I love their design, the long black robes with the hood. It makes them look creepy and mysterious. I hope that we get to see more of them in the sequel. There's a cool detail right before the Gom Jabbar scene, where Paul is adjusting his clothes, and when he reaches the collar area, he feels something itching in his neck, the same spot where the Reverend Mother will hold a poison needle against him during the test. It's a subtle way to show to the audience that he's slowly seeing the future. In the next day, House Atreides prepare to leave Caladan. This whole sequence is visually stunning, with the ships rising from the water as Paul looks at his homeworld for one last time. Another subtle moment is when we cut to the palace and you can see that Lady Jessica is worried about the departure, symbolized by Leto's hand touching her neck in a comforting way. When they get to Arrakis, they're somewhat greeted by hundreds of Fremen, and they start pointing towards Jessica and Paul, yelling Lisan al-Gaib, a prophet from another planet, in other words, a messiah, referring to Paul. It's funny that after his experience with the Gom Jabbar, Paul starts to dislike the Bene Gesserit and their plans, claiming that they plant superstitions about him on Arrakis, but we learn that's just to help pave the way for the Kwisatz Haderach. After an assassination attempt on Paul, the character starts to suspect of a possible Harkonnen infiltration in Arrakeen. Following this incident, Duke Leto gets extremely mad at the Atreides' Mentat, Tufir Hawad, since he was responsible to ensure that the city was safe and secure. After a meeting with the generals and soldiers, Duncan Idaho returns from his mission to contact the Fremen, where we're introduced to their leader, Stilgar, who comes to Arrakeen in an effort to negotiate with the Duke, asking him to leave the desert to the Fremen and to not attack his people. Stilgar is surprised by the cordiality of Leto. I enjoy this scene because it shows the difference between the goals of the Atreides, which is to make an alliance with the locals, as opposed to the Harkonnens, who want to exploit and eliminate all the obstacles to control the planet's wealth. The scene that follows is surely one of the most memorable moments of the film, when the planetologists Liet Kynes, Paul, Leto, and Gurney go to check out the spice harvester, but before that the mechanics of the steel suits are explained. It recycles the body's fluids to in turn transform it into drinkable water in order to survive in the desert. When the team arrives at the spice site, a sandworm begins to converge on the harvester's location, since it's drawn by the machine's noise. The Duke then suggests to save the workers, a risky move considering that all the spice gathered will be lost. Paul leaves the ornithopter to escort the workers, but he then collapses on the ground as he starts having a vision. It's nice that we get a callback to one of the previous scenes, where Paul is training at Caladan and hears Gurney's footsteps, claiming that he recognizes them. Halleck saves him and the team flies away as they see the sandworm eating the spice harvest. The family's medic, Dr. Yue, analyzes Paul after his vision, saying that spice can trigger those types of reactions on him. Lady Jessica learns that her son saw during the collapse that she's pregnant. This information makes her incredibly uneasy, since all the signs point towards Paul being the chosen one, the Kwisatz Haderach, a dangerous path for her son. At night, the attack happens. The shields and communication system of Arrakeen are turned off, facilitating the Harkonnen ambush. Duke Leto hears the explosions and goes to investigate, but in the process he gets paralyzed by the traitor, Dr. Yue, who made a deal with the Baron to disable the city's protection and deliver the Duke in exchange for Wanna's survival, the Doctor's wife. The betrayal could have been better executed. In the book, there's a constant dilemma inside Dr. Yue's head questioning his own actions, since he really liked House Atreides. In the film, we don't get that inner conflict, it rather comes out of nowhere. Don't get me wrong, the scene is great, but it could have had a better build-up. Later on, it becomes clear that the Baron is a despicable person. He humiliates Leto Atreides by having him sit naked while he's unable to do anything, since he was paralyzed. When Dr. Yue enters the room expecting his reward, the Baron cuts off his head, maniacally teasing Wanna's death.
Sojourner.
The Duke's life ends as he breaks the tooth that the Doctor implanted in his mouth, exhaling the poison gas, killing multiple soldiers including Piter de Vries and injuring the Baron. The execution of this scene was excellent. I think we can speculate that the weird-looking spider-like creature you see in the beginning at Giedi Prime could actually be Wanna, since the creature has some human features, like the head and hands. If that's the case, it really increases the brutality and malice of the Baron. During the attack, Paul and Jessica are captured by 3 Harkonnen soldiers that plan to throw them off the ornithopter to be eaten by the sandworms. An interesting detail is that Jessica's mouth is covered because the guards know that she's a Bene Gesserit and is able to control them through the voice. What they don't know is that Paul also has that ability and his mouth wasn't covered. Due to this mistake, he's able to control the soldiers to untie his mother. The scene was incredibly well done, with high stakes as their death was imminent and the sense of urgency is felt. After they succeed, the Thopter lands and they seek refuge in their improvised tent. Paul sees that Dr. Yui left him some useful supplies as well as Leto's ring, revealing his death. Since they're in the desert, the spice begins to affect Paul, triggering another vision. He now sees way into the future where he's leading an army while fighting the Sardaukar combined with many dead bodies. Based on his reactions, this future terrifies him. This sequence was incredible and sinister, since it's possible that this brutal future could end up happening. On a side note, I love the long one-take shot of Paul decimating the Sardaukar forces. In the next day, when Paul and Jessica exit the tent, they are found by Duncan, Idaho, but before that, Paul encounters the desert mouse, one of the few animal creatures that can survive on Arrakis, called Muad'Dib. If you've read the book, you know that this name is important to the story. The team travels to an ecological testing station owned by the Fremen to get more supplies and stillsuits, but when they're unexpectedly ambushed by the Sardaukar, Duncan makes an honorable sacrifice to buy some time for Liet Kynes, Paul and Jessica to escape. In the beginning of the movie, when Paul talks to Duncan, he says he had a dream of seeing Idaho's death, which sadly ends up happening. They decide to part ways because Kynes has a plan to report to the Landsraad Council about the attack on Arrakeen and the trap set by the Emperor alongside House Harkonnen. Sadly, while trying to escape, she's dangerously wounded by the Sardaukar forces. The build-up to this scene foreshadows something you'll see at the end of the movie, Fremen riding sandworms, as Liet prepares her riding anchors. To me, her death is better handled in the film, because in the book Kynes is captured and left to die without any equipment alone in the desert, a little anticlimactic if you ask me. But here she dies as the sandworm she called eats both her and the soldiers. An interesting detail is that when she's stabbed, water comes out of the wound. It makes sense considering that the stillsuit has recycled water inside of it. When I first saw the movie, I was shocked by the body count. Duke Leto Atreides, Duncan Idaho, Liet Kynes, and the majority of House Atreides. A thing that's not clear here in the film is the fate of Gurney Halleck and Thufir Hawat. In many movies, the important characters usually have plot armor, so it's refreshing to see that in Dune no character is safe, making it feel unpredictable. When Paul and Jessica use an ornithopter to escape, a sandstorm damages their vehicle, stranding them in the middle of nowhere in the desert. There's a minor scene where they're changing their clothes to put on their stillsuits, where Jessica looks at Paul, seeing how much his attitude has changed ever since they left Caladan. The scene is framed very similarly to when Jessica goes to Leto's room to talk to him, conveying that Paul reminds her of his deceased father. You can see that she's still mourning his death in this subtle moment. It's neat that during the journey, Paul teaches Jessica how to sandwalk, a technique commonly used by the Fremen to avoid being detected by the sandworms, something that was teased back at Arrakeen where Paul was watching a useful video about Arrakis. While trying to reach the Fremen, the pair is ambushed by a sandworm. This is the first time you get to see how the creature really looks like. At first you only saw its mouth. It's interesting that the worm somewhat recognizes Paul after emerging. This is apparent by its refusal to attack them. After hearing a thumper, the sandworm leaves and the pair is found by Stilgar and his crew. Jessica then overpowers the leader, making the Fremen stop fighting. It is in this moment that Paul meets the girl he's been constantly seeing in his visions, Chani. Speaking of his visions, there are many moments where he sees his death. This metaphorically happens when he defeats the Fremen warrior Jamis. Paul Atreides dies and the Kwisatz Haderach is born, a point of no return in the quest set by the Bene Gesserit. The film ends as the group travels to a Fremen hideout, Siege Tower, teasing and setting up the stage for the sequel. As you can probably tell, I love this movie, and it's a faithful adaptation of the first half of the book. The screenplay is terrific, and it's kind of surprising how much it succeeds at capturing the book's essence, since the narrative is complex and the world incredibly rich. It's baffling to me to see that some people found the movie boring. The story is very engaging, the acting is superb, and technically the movie is beautiful. These two aspects will be discussed shortly. Since there are many important characters in the movie, this time I've decided to make a separate section dedicated to them. Please note that I'll be talking about the characters that to me were the most memorable. Let's start with Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet. He nailed the role, plus he resembles the description the character was given in the book. Chalamet really delivers on the scenes with strong emotions, like during the Gom Jabbar. His reactions to the pain were very believable and they don't look forced nor fake. The sequence where he sees his future while in trance due to the spice was also great. He truly looked terrified of what he saw. He was amazing in the action scenes as well. It was impressive that he did the whole training session with Josh Brolin without a stunt double. In many moments of the film, his acting is very subtle, conveying many thoughts without any dialogue. A great performance and one of the best in the movie. Lady Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson, was fantastic. In the book, she's supposed to be calm and collected, but I really like the vulnerability she brought to the character, and her reactions towards all the situations surrounding her son were great. When Jessica needed to be fierce, she was. Ferguson was also amazing when selling the action moments, like the scene in the ornithopter after they are captured. Lady Jessica was also one of my favorite characters in the film, and, just like Paul, the actress fit her book description very well. Duke Leto Atreides, played by Oscar Isaac, was exceptional. Even though his role wasn't that big, he really sold the character and was a remarkable leader. Isaac had great chemistry with all the actors, especially with Chalamet and Ferguson. The trio was very well cast, and if I'm being honest, I can actually see Timothée Chalamet being the son of Oscar Isaac and Rebecca Ferguson. The casting is that good. Still talking about the Atreides, Duncan Idaho, played by Jason Momoa, was surely one of the highlights of the movie. He brought a fun energy to the scenes, and Duncan was a great fighter, even referred to by Peter de Vries, one of the best in the Imperium. Momoa had great chemistry with Chalamet, and the friendship between Paul and Idaho was cool. The greeting they had was very wholesome. It was sad to see him sacrifice himself to buy some time for the team in order to escape the ecological testing station. Duncan's actions were very honorable. I also really enjoyed Charlotte Rampling's performance as the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayam. Even though she has a very small role during the first act, she left a lasting impression. The way Rampling delivered her lines was perfect. You got that sense of authority and experience. A great character, and like I said previously, I would love more scenes with the Bene Gesserit in the next movie. Moving over to the villain side, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård, delivered a frightening and intense performance. His deep and raspy voice was chilling. Every time he was on screen, the tension increased dramatically. The scene where we see him for the first time using his weight suspenders as he starts floating around the air was amazing. Also, huge props to the makeup team because they helped create the character by giving him a full bodysuit, since the Baron is extremely overweight. He was a great menacing villain. Speaking of which, I can't wait to meet the Emperor in the sequel, alongside the Spacing Guild, since they look mysteriously interesting as we only saw a glimpse of them during the ceremony at the beginning of the movie. Even though the Emperor is absent, his presence is felt over the course of the film, overseeing the whole operation and the downfall of House Atreides. Long story short, all of the main cast was fantastic throughout. I'm very excited to see the new additions to the roster in part 2. The movie's pacing is phenomenal. Every scene is important and adds something to the future, especially Paul's visions. I like that this movie is a slow burn, where it doesn't give you all the answers straight away, and it often relies on visual storytelling as opposed to expository dialogue. For example, with the voice. It's never really explained how it works. Its mechanics are rather shown to the audience. In this instance, you don't need a character explaining all of its details. This is where a visual explanation becomes more effective. Speaking of visuals, the film is beautifully crafted. The directing by Denis Villeneuve and the cinematography by Greg Fraser are incredible. Every scene is beautifully shot and the usage of lighting is excellent, or at some times the lack thereof. For instance, while at night in the desert, the scenes look naturally dark and the lights used are dimmer and more soft. Even though sometimes it can be a little hard to see, I enjoyed this artistic choice. An interesting detail is that while at Caladan, the lighting and colors have a more cool and bluish aesthetic, mirroring the look of the planet, in contrast to Arrakis, where everything has a more warm feel, tonally consistent with the desert landscape. It's great to see that Villeneuve is a passionate director that wants to shoot on location, rather than in a soundstage. The whole crew went and shot on real deserts. Of course the indoor scenes weren't filmed there, but still, the sets were fully built with incredible detail, like for example the interiors of Arrakeen. They also used CGI when necessary and not that often, as opposed to many studios nowadays that shoot 95% of a movie in front of a green screen. Every digital effect was seamlessly integrated into a scene, and at no point did it ever feel fake. The effects are some of the best I've ever seen. It really felt like they were shooting on Arrakis. The team prioritized practical effects, and when it wasn't possible they used CGI, like for example the sandworms. You can't build something like that practically. When a movie is shot mixing both kinds of effects, it results in a fantastic looking production. The score is incredible, composed by Hans Zimmer, is its own character. The Dune soundtrack is one of his best work. Each character in house has its own memorable score that captures their essence. I personally like the trumpets on the Harkonnen theme. During the attack on Arrakeen, there's a scene where spaceships are starting to land on Arrakis. Even if you don't know whose ships they are, through the score you know that they're Harkonnens, a great way to explain something to the audience through sound. Speaking of which, the sound design is incredible, and like I mentioned before, what they did with the voice was fantastic. The sound of the sandworm was great, mimicking the noise that a thumper makes. The costume design was very well done. The still suits look very practical and something you could actually wear in order to survive in the desert. I particularly liked Lady Jessica's wardrobe. Throughout the movie she wears different types of dresses, but my favorite has to be the one she wears when the Atreides arrive at Arrakis. It is a very beautiful and elegant dress. With a film market oversaturated by mediocre movies with lazy writing and messy productions, it was amazing to see a well-acted and crafted film like Denis Villeneuve's Dune. To sum everything up, this film moved me. After I saw it in theaters, it changed my perspective on filmmaking as a whole, making me appreciate more of the craftsmanship involved in making a movie, such as editing, directing, cinematography, sound, acting. Everything is important and not just spectacle and big explosions. While watching Dune, you can see and feel the level of passion and love that the crew has for the source material, especially Denis Villeneuve since this was his dream project. Thankfully, the team succeeded at creating a beautiful adaptation that honors Frank Herbert's work in the first half of the book, and in the process they were rightfully rewarded with 6 Oscars. I'm very excited to see how they'll conclude this complex story in the long-awaited sequel Dune Part 2.